Hello, this is Mr. Stewart bringing you another quiz tutorial. This is the quiz regarding complementary and supplementary angles, the second quiz of Chapter 7 and the second quiz of Unit 4 Geometry. I really like geometry, and so forgive me if I get a little excited. Complementary and supplementary angles are probably the two more helpful angles relationships to understand in geometry. They're very helpful to know about, and they are very consistent. So we're going to talk about them, and hopefully this video helps if you're struggling with this quiz. The first question reads, use the image below to match the angles to their correct classifications. So notice how we just have letters here, not numbers, so doesn't really matter. What we're going to do is just compare them and say, okay, are these pairs complementary, supplementary, or neither? And so that's what we're going to be doing here. So let's take a look at this. So if you notice, the picture, the image, has two intersecting lines here, right? And also forms what looks like, now I want you to pay very close attention to this, whenever an angle, so we'll just draw another one, whenever an angle forms a right angle, meaning we can put a square in it, okay, we call this a right angle, or 90-degree angle. So we put a square in that corner, and so this implies right here, these two corners imply this is a 90-degree angle and this is a 90-degree angle, and that's important to understand, okay? So basically you just need to remember two things about angles, about complementary and supplementary angles. Complementary angles, by definition, and if you don't remember you want to go look this up, complementary angles by definition are two angles whose sum equals 90 degrees. Now, the way I think I remember this mostly, so I don't get them confused, is if you complement somebody, it is the right thing to do. And so a complementary angle implies the correct or the right thing to do, or in other words, a right angle, so that's another word for saying 90 degrees. If I say 90-degree angle, the same way of saying that is saying it's a right angle. So that's a good way to remember it. So a sum literally just means adding together. So basically, if I said 2 plus 3, that equals 5. Or I would say the sum of these two numbers is 5. Now, this problem with that is if I had an angle that was 2 degrees and an angle that was 3 degrees, and I added them together, it clearly does not equal 90 degrees. So I would say that these two angles are not complementary. Right? Another example would be this. If I had an angle that was 30 degrees, and then I had another angle that was 60 degrees, well, guess what? 60 plus 30, the sum of those two, is 90. So I would say that these two angles are complementary. That's just how that definition goes. Now let's talk about supplementary. Supplementary angles are similar to complementary angles, only supplementary angles are two angles whose sum equals 180 degrees. And that's it. So I think of supplementary angles. Supplementary angles is kind of saying like straight. You can think of straight. GHT, straight angles, supplementary angles, they both start with an S. And those are the only two you really have to keep track of right now is complementary and supplementary. So supplementary angles are straight angles, and we know that straight angles are 180 degrees. So if I were to measure this out, and remember 360 degrees, okay, so just think about how 360 degrees, so 360 degrees is like a full circle across, right? So one full circle. If I were to measure the degree of rotation all the way around like I was measuring a clock, by the time we end up where we started, that's 360 degrees. So you remember that a straight edge is just half of that circle. Half of that circle. Whoops, I didn't want to put that away, but that's right. Half of that circle, and half a circle is half of 360 degrees, or in other words, 180 degrees. So again, supplementary angle, straight angle, 180 degrees. So the degrees of which a straight edge is measured needs to be sort of memorized, and this information will be helpful for you. Okay. So now what you just need to remember is simply how to answer this question. The idea is to write the letter from column B in the space in column A. It will form a matching line. Some answers will be used more than once. Or in other words, some pairs of angles. So like angle A and B might be supplement or might line up for A, but then this one also might go to A as well. So in other words, column B will have multiple lines running to some of them, perhaps not all of them. So if it's been used once, don't panic too much. But just remember that's how it works. You have to either type A, B, or C in them. Remember that if the two angles do not equal, when added together, 180 degrees or 90 degrees, then they are neither supplementary nor complementary. And the only caution I have for you is I don't want you to assume that it looks close enough. Because some of you might look at this and go, well, that might be, it could be, but I don't want you to assume that. In fact, you can't assume that. You cannot assume that. So even though it looks like there might be one pair of angles here that might be supplementary, I don't want you to be confused. Don't assume that it is unless you are absolutely sure. And the only way you know for sure is if it's intersecting a right angle or a line's intersecting a straight angle. Okay, the next question reads, it says, use the images below to accurately complete each sentence. Use the words or phrases found in the word bank. You'll have to use the words or phrases in the word bank because this question will grade you based on spelling. So if you don't spell neither complementary nor supplementary or supplementary, whatever, if you don't spell these accurately, then it'll count you wrong. So just use the word bank. Click on the actual words once you're in there, and that should be just fine. Now, the one thing you need to remember about complementary and supplementary is the angles don't have to be touching. They don't even have to share a common vertex or wall or side to be considered complementary or supplementary. The only rule about them is complementary. The sum of them, those two, need to be equal to 90 degrees, and supplementary, the sum needs to be equal to 180. That's it. So if you have two angles, any two angles, even if they are not touching, like these two examples, even if they're not touching, if the sum's 90 degrees, they're complementary. If the sum's 180 degrees, they're supplementary, and you're done. So that's what we're working with here. So don't be confused just because these two examples are not touching each other. They still may be, but may not be complementary or supplementary. Okay, now for the math. Students may look at this one and get a little confused, but I don't want you to panic too much. I'm just going to give you some hints and then leave you with it, okay? So let's say I'm working with something like this. I'm going to make my own, but let's just pretend for a second, okay? All right. So the first thing is first. Let's say I'm just going to pretend this is 40 degrees, okay? And that's all I have. Well, except for the fact that I do know that this is a right angle. That's helpful. I also know this is a straight edge. That's helpful because, well, let's face it, we know what complementary and supplementary angles are. So if this is a right angle and this line is intersecting that right angle, then I know that this plus this angle, right, is going to be equal to 90 degrees. They're complementary. So in other words, I would subtract 40 from 90 and I would get 50. And so the angle here is 50 degrees. Sorry, I just had a little bit of a brain stop right there for a second. Anyway, because 50 plus 90 equals, plus 40 equals 90 degrees. So since we know they're complementary, I know what that one is equal to. Now you're just going to use your information over here to find A. That's not going to be too hard. Well, now look at this. We also know that this angle right here to this angle plus this angle should be supplementary. Why? Well, because this angle plus this angle is forming a straight edge, and that's really helpful for us. So I use this to my advantage and I say that's 180 degrees total. And if I already know that part of it is 40 degrees, then I just subtract to find the remainder, 140 degrees. So I know that my example over here, again, this is mine, not yours. This is my example. I know that my angle right here is 140 degrees. Now, you can find this angle using two different methods. First of all, vertical angles. What's so special about vertical angles? This angle and this angle are formed by two intersecting straight lines. So vertical angles are always congruent. That one's going to be quite easy for you. And finally, this is just going to be a given. If you get stuck on this one, I just want you to think about what does it mean when there is a square in a corner. Okay, a square in a corner literally means that I can put a perfect square in a corner, and every square always has, or rectangle or whatever you like, but its angles are special. They always come out to be 90 degrees, and that's important. We always use right angles for that idea. So in other words, you should already know what this angle is. Okay, you need to know what that angle is right off the bat. There should be no reason why you should miss angle E. For the actual answers, place them in the blanks and just put the numbers. Notice we've already included the degree sign there, so you don't need to worry about putting the degree symbol. Just put the number. So if the number is, that, so then you just put the number in there. Okay. Okay, this last one, it's only a question long, so, you guys are used to having to answer multiple questions per one question. But this one, well, you know what? This one is, let me make up an example, okay? So here is a right angle. Here's a line that's intersecting that right angle. And let's pretend like let's say I'm going to call this M. And let's say this is M plus, I don't know, 15. Well, what do we know about these two angles? Okay, they are forming a right angle. They are complementary. These two angles, their sum equals 90 degrees. Well, we can use algebra then to help us out. In other words, I would say M, this angle, plus this angle, M plus 15, is equal to, if I add them together, they're equal 90 degrees. That's going to be helpful. So watch this. M plus M equals what? Well, there's two of them, so there's now two M's. So again, we're going back to your understanding from Unit 2. You have to know how to solve equations. This is why we spent so much time, almost a half a year, just on equations. So 2M plus 15 equals 90 degrees. Solve for M. Subtract 15 first from both sides. That's going to be equal to, let's see, 75 equals 2M. Then in my example, I just divide both sides by 2. And I get whatever that happens to be. So 75, 2 goes into 75, exactly 37.5 or 37 5/10 times. Or in other words, M equals 37 5/10, which makes sense now. If I put 37 5/10 into this angle and then 37 5/10 into M for here, I get 37 5/10 plus 15 on this side, which is going to be 5, so 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So, and then 3, 4, 52 5/10. If I added 52 5/10 to 37 5/10, what do I expect to get? You should be thinking, well, 90 degrees. 7, 8, 9, 10, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 90 degrees, and we are good. So you'll want to do the same thing to this over here. Hopefully this is helpful. If you got stuck on complementary and supplementary angles after this quiz, you should be experts with them both.